How you doing? This is Young Guru and welcome to Mix with the Masters. I'm going to run you through sort of my production process and how I go from just listening to records and getting to a full finished record. I know a lot of people have heard me talk about mixing, but I kind of want to start from the beginning. I kind of want to give an example of what it's like to sit in a room in silence and say, hey, I want to create something. How do you create a vibe? How do you start? How do you work with artists and really sculpt a song into something? I'm going to take you through me working on my MPC, maybe exporting that and showing you what I do in Ableton and some of the tricks in Ableton that I don't think people normally use or know about. And then finally taking that product and sharing it with my production partner in Pro Tools and then finishing the record in Pro Tools. So hopefully by the end of this today, you'll get some better ideas of what you can do to help your music. I normally start with going through records. That's sort of my source of where I get inspiration from on a daily basis. I'm a digger. I dig for old records. I get inspired by them. I'm one of those people who tries to figure out how people got sounds in whatever era. You know, all of that makes us better as musicians, as engineers, as producers. That thing of studying history is something that's big with me. Even if the sample itself doesn't make it to the final product, it's what sort of creates and kicks off and sparks my idea. My inspiration, again, comes from records, and I will sift through records for hours and hours before I even land on something. Sometimes I bookmark things that I'm going to do later, but when I was going through records, I was playing this record from Chairman of the Board, which is a group, and they put out an album in 1972 called Bittersweet. And there was one particular song that really, really caught my ear. That would be as much as I need. I sort of get into a vibe. I hear tones and I hear instruments that I love. I hear things that I feel like I can manipulate. One thing that you should know about me is that I use a bunch of different DAWs. There are things that I like for different reasons. So, you know, my initial production most of the time starts in an MPC. That's the tool that I've been using for years. It's not to say that it's better or worse than any other beat machine or program. It's just what I am accustomed to and what I've been used to. I love my MPC 3000. Now, because we have the MPC Studio, that sort of workflow can go with me everywhere. I think that's an important part of when you're actually getting to work. Us as engineers, we love the latest, greatest. We love new plugins. We love to explore new things. But when it's time to really get to work, you need to grab that tool that'll allow you to do exactly what you want to do the fastest. You know, knowing your tool inside and out is invaluable in production because you don't want to waste the inspiration time saying, how do I do this specific thing? You want to dive straight into it. And for me, that's an MPC. I can easily, you know, select the record, sample off of that record, put it into a format that I'm used to. My mind sort of works in these blocks of 4 and 4 with these 16 pads. It's just the way that I was raised and what I came up on. When I'm chopping up samples, the very first thing that I do is sort of put them in the MPC and start to manipulate them in a very familiar way. So when I was listening to this, the first thing that I would do was slow it down just a little bit and manipulate it so that I can have different hits on different pads. So I would take just that part. So if you listen to that, it sounds like, how would you put that together? But it's just like. That's sort of the thing. If you notice, I'm not going 1, 2, 3, 4, it's. What that also does is allow for some mistakes. You know, there's a beautiful thing when we use equipment that everything is not just this picture perfect thing. The equipment itself starts to give you a response from what you put into it. And that's why people gravitate towards certain equipment. So when I chop this up, that's exactly what I did. I just started with this. But if you notice, you'll hear, you know, that whole bass note doesn't come out because I'm playing it faster than what the actual song was. So it's. That's basically the loop. Now, when I'm producing, this is enough for me to have a vibe. Now I have a vibe that's going in the room. Now I know sort of where I'm going to go. I'm starting to think about what I'm going to layer over top of this. I'm starting to think about what the song could be about to make suggestions. One of the good things about working with Volley is that I can sort of suggest something to him and he creates whole songs about it. You know, it doesn't take a lot of suggestion with him because we've already had conversation about where we want to go. Or I've had the pleasure of giving Volley, you know, examples of my life. He'll hear me complaining about something and he can write a whole song that has to do with my life. It's one of those things where I know once I get a great vibe going that he can create a song from scratch based off of whatever this vibe is. So this initial vibe, where do we go and how fast do we get there, is super important. I'm huge on being a breakbeat guy. What do I mean by breakbeats for people that don't understand? For us that are diggers, we would dig specifically for records that have open drums on them. The advantage and the beauty of this, and just being a digger in general, is that one, you were listening to a bunch of music that was completely outside of your sphere, completely outside of the normal music that your friends listen to or that your parents listen to. You were taken into a complete world just by looking for open drums. You know, and I want you guys to really understand that this was pre-internet. This was before, you know, you could just go online and just figure out what the drum loops were. For us, it was digging for records and having to listen to the whole record to figure out exactly where those open breaks are, those open drums. So as that loop is playing, I'll then start searching through my drum breaks and figure out what drums I want to put underneath, what textures go along with this. And those things sort of describe our sound. When I found those drums, it was like, okay, that's the sort of like the hip hop part of it that's bringing us into sort of this heavy drum thing. But again, I didn't want to just use this drum break to go on the 1 and the 2 and the 3. So it's really good to be able to chop up drums. If you notice, this one goes on the 1, 2, but then this comes in on that 3 before it gets to the next bar. And then you notice too, you'll start to get little artifacts because somebody's starting to talk on the record, but I'm gonna sort of cut that off because once I get from, I'll go back to my second row. Again, this is my mind thinking in rows of 4 and 4 because the crash comes on this first one. Then I can come back. That's the basic idea. So when you put those two together, you'll get this. So now I have a great 8-bar sequence where I have a crash coming on the 1 and I'm continuing, but then it's really interesting to hear those voices and how they add on, you know, from the drum break with the music. And then from that point, I just start to go through the record and try to find things to spice up whatever it is I'm doing. So I may have started, you know, again, we're trying to take something that is just a basic 8-bar loop and flesh it out into a song. So there's these little bits and pieces that you might get while you're sampling along the way. So if I'm sampling the drums, yeah, I have the part that's going to just play out, but I'll also take this beginning sound so that I can then go, I know that's a way for me to start. You know, this is just my ideas when I'm starting to say, what are the things that are going to help me to flesh this out? So my first thing when I'm listening to this and I'm going, okay, this sounds great, but the drums sound a little thin. So my next thing would to be go out and get a 1 shot. I'm going to think kick and I'm going to think 808. And what I want is just this muffled low end. So if you hear, there's not a lot on the top end of that kick, and that's another thing that we'll get into when we talk about texture. So for this specifically, I was layering a kick so that it feels a little muffled but goes along. That already has the high part. This low part needs to go underneath of it. So we start layering. Most of the things that I do are done directly from this little pad. And it's my workflow, it's my way of thinking. I could literally shut this computer and work this blindfold. So as I'm layering and adding, it's just about feel for that moment. This only takes, when you say I made this beat in 5 minutes, yeah, you caught a vibe, but it wasn't 5 minutes. It was actually me going to the record store and digging for records. It was hours of me being online. It was hours of me collecting sounds. It was hours of me tailoring those sounds so that when I get down to work, I can work fast and I know exactly where everything is at. So now is when I start to sort of go through the record and find screams or stabs or maybe a horn sound that I'm gonna filter or any of those things. So inside of this record, there was some really good just screams. Those things sort of just stood out to me. Like I said before, one of the weird things that's just one of my quirks is that I like to work in a bunch of different programs. I feel comfortable enough knowing all of these programs. So I sort of go with a program depending on what the strength of that program is. There are things that I like to do inside of Ableton because Ableton gives me so much flexibility in being able to manipulate sounds. Being able to just run through ideas now that I have this basic idea down and help me flesh it out. It's also a place where I can start to sort of pre-mix things and get great sounds depending on what I want because there's so many tools inside of Ableton when I'm working on just different tracks. So if I have that original just, drum break that I was doing, now I have it in Ableton. Again, my mind, sort of loves the fact that I can not only flesh out into 64 pads, but if I want to, just by hitting my layout, now I can think again in my 4 pad, and stretch it all the way out so that once I get to my samples, I can access everything all at one time. I can switch to another mode to where I'm actually, step editing if I want to. All of those things are great for me. So that's the reason why I may take individual sounds and place them in a pad inside of Ableton. The other reason that I do that is because I can then start to manipulate with all of the racks that I have set up already in Ableton. One of the great things for me is to be able to work with drum breaks, and I'll mute the rest of these so there's just the drum break playing. And I already go to my presets, and I'll go inside of my audio effects, and you'll see at the bottom of this, I have a folder that says Young Guru. And these are racks that I've already set up that help me do certain things. It really helps my flow. So if you listen again to this drum break without, and this is the drum break with. So immediately you hear that there's a volume increase. You hear that there's all of this stuff going on, but that's because I have this really extensive rack that I've set up. And if you don't understand racks inside of Ableton, these are the most powerful part of this program. Now that we're outside of Ableton and I've bounced what I did in Ableton and we put it in Pro Tools, what you're looking at now is the initial song idea session. We've gone over how I did the breaks. We've gone over these couple like kicks and 808s that I added and the little voices and things that are in it to sort of enhance it. But those are just the first couple of tracks. When I was inside of Ableton, I added a couple Junos that was sort of taking me in the vein of where I wanted to go in terms of sounds that I wanted to put on top of it. This is me watching my favorite groups, like a De La Soul or something like that, where there was all these little parts that come in, but they all contribute to the record. So I add a bunch of things, but I also edit myself. I take out a bunch of things. So as you'll notice, just these voices, you know, they start here. They were running through the whole thing. You'll get to a point over here where there was a decision to mute them for the second half, right? Then I start layering it, and I added this Juno, right? This basic sound. But again, I'm just giving you an idea of my process. The more I put in, the more, you know, flavor we have to play with, the more Volley has, you know, space to write around, the more things he can do. You know, Volley's very good at arranging a song. Not only does he come up with the idea, you know, I'll email him this beat in Pro Tools so that he can start writing. And when I first hear it back, it sounds like this. It's him coming in and going, okay. So just that intro part shows you exactly what I mean about arrangement. It's still those same parts, but you don't get the drums yet. You don't get the kick yet. The 808 only comes in after those first 4 bars. The loop is what really starts the whole thing. We don't hear the voices until the scream, which is sort of now playing off the end of his hook. Again, this is how songs are created. This is how you say, okay, well, this was the vibe he set, and this is what we're going to do. That's the sound. And if I don't like that sound, I'll do it again, or I'll do something else. But you sort of stop your creativity when you know that you have so many options, you'll never come to a decision. So decision making and saying, yeah, that's it, go with that one, is one of the greatest things you can do in terms of production.